Right.
And you just kind of like, bam, they're right. So I'm glad you're still pushing water uphill there. That's good.
But
It has to happen.
it has to
It has
happen.
to happen.
But also, hey, Tina.
How are you?
Fine. How are you?
I think the last time we saw each other was
The AM4C conference.
Jersey.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, and she was also out in Malawi.
That's when I was thinking I last saw you.
Yeah.
We're just discussing the good stories and the bad stories.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm really talking. I haven't even.
I'm really,
Oh, great.
I'm really
Great.
delighted.
Are you still?
For right now, well, I'm still with this foundation, this nonprofit. It's the Foundation for a Smoke-Free World. For a smoke-free world. And in Malawi, it's the agricultural, but in Malawi, it's the. Well, I've been working with Carl Larkins, and he used to be my chief of party in West Bank, Gaza. And great. Okay. Well, I'll leave
And I
you to
have
the panel.
stuff. So you're safe to talk. Well, you know,
No, so
I think that.
now
it's warming up. It is warming up.
I am so glad you're on this.
Good morning, everyone.
Not sure what, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Trying to figure out what was be most appropriate to say.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to SID-USA's panel discussion on solutions for more resilient global food systems. My name is Gloria Steele, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of CARE. And I know that most of you, like me, are here because of our deep interest in food security, in addressing issues related to global hunger. So thank you so much for coming. Before we get started, I want to recognize Sylvia. Is Sylvia here? Sylvia Megret. There she is. She's the CEO and president of ACDI VOCA. And it was she who had this idea of having this panel discussion. So thank you so much, Sylvia. I also want to thank Catherine Riffelson, who is the CEO of SID-USA. I don't know if Catherine is here. She's probably circulating around for hosting us today. And this morning, we are honored to have three of the leading thinkers, policymakers, researchers, in the area of food security, global food systems. And so thank you so much, Dina Esposito, Emmy Simmons, and David Swillman for being here with us today. Dina, right on my left, is the assistant to the administrator for the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security at USAID, and the deputy coordinator for Feed the Future, the US government's flagship global food security initiative. I'm sure most of you know about Feed the Future. She is also USAID's Global Food Crisis Coordinator. Dina has had a long career in the area of both development and humanitarian sectors, including serving as the director of the Office for Food for Peace, which is now part of the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance at USAID, and most recently, before joining USAID, was Vice President for Technical Leadership at Mercy Corps. Thank you, Dina, for joining us. M. Simmons is a longtime friend, is a non-resident senior advisor of the Global Food Security Program at CSIS. She is a member of the Global Panel on Agriculture and Food Systems for Nutrition, and is a current and former board member of many organizations that work on food security, agriculture, and rural development. Speaking of a long career in development, Emmy was the first, right? Presidentially appointed career officer of a bureau at USAID. She was the assistant administrator for EGAT, Economic Growth, Agriculture, and Trade.
Correct.
That's right. So, Emmy, thank you for being here with us. EGAT is the predecessor of DDI, twice removed. So that's what EGAT
Inside
is.
baseball there.
Yeah. And last but not the least, we have Dr. David Spillman, who is currently the Director of Innovation Policy and Scaling at IFPRI, International Food Policy Research Institute. His research agenda covers a wide range of topics, including agriculture and rural development policy, agricultural science, technology innovation, plant genetic resources, and seed systems. David previously worked in agriculture and rural development at the World Bank and also worked with the Aga Khan Development Network. David, thank you for being here with us. So, why are we here talking about solutions for a more resilient global systems? I think, as most of you know, the trends in global efforts to eliminate hunger and malnutrition is really going down south. It isn't what we expected. The latest report of the UN, the State of Food and Nutrition report, says that in 2021, there were over 800 million people who were suffering from hunger. And this was over 100 million more than 150 million, the number of people before the outbreak of COVID-19. And the gender gap in food insecurity is widening, with women reported to have moderate to severe malnutrition at 32% compared to men at 27%. And this is something we need to look at because it is important to address the gender gap. And I'm glad that Dina will talk about this because addressing the gender gap alone, according to the FAO, could reduce global food insecurity by 2 percentage points and increase global GDP by 1%. That's major because that has important implications also for having access to food. An estimated 45 million children under the age of 5 were reported to be suffering from wasting, which is the worst form of malnutrition. And finally, here's really something that I thought was very disturbing. According to the UN, who set zero hunger by 2030, it's unlikely that we will reach that target. In fact, by 2030, we will be at 670 million, which is what it was in 2015 when the zero hunger target was set. And so that's why we're here today. We would like to hear from people who really are spending time thinking about this issue and reflecting on their recommendations and actions that development partners, civil society, the private sector need to be taking. So with that, Emmy, let me start with you. You've been working in the area of agriculture, food security, nutrition for a long time. And how has the thinking on the challenge of food security evolved since 2015, when the Sustainable Development Goals were set, or even since 2008, 2009, when the first major food crisis happened in this decade? Emmy?
Great question, thank you. Thank you, Gloria, for sort of leading this off and involving me in this panel. I came back from my last USAID overseas posting, Russia. Matt Mosner is somewhere here. And in 1997. 1997 was also the year in which the USAID investments in agriculture were historically the lowest ever. So I came back to Washington, and part of my mandate was, in fact, to take another look at agriculture and kind of see what could be done to strengthen the USAID emphasis on agriculture. I was actually quite unsuccessful in this task, unfortunately, But in 2008, 2009, when I had already left USAID, I think the world was shaken out of its complacency about food and agriculture. There'd been kind of an assumption that, well, we didn't need to invest a lot more in agriculture because, you know, there were a lot of farmers, we had a great big pile of food, the wheat farmers from America were exporting quite nicely, things were going well. 2008, 2009, when there was a crisis in oil prices as well as food prices, kind of shook that complacency and redrew attention to the issue of food security. President Obama at the time worked with the G7 and others to put together the initiative which is known as Feed the Future, 2 generations, I think, before Dina. And attention was redrawn to the issue of agriculture. But it became pretty evident quite soon that just increasing production was not enough. That in fact the issue of food security was not something that could be produced out of the way. And so we have continued to see serious issues with food security, in large part due to conflict for many years, and more recently due to market disruption because of COVID. So I think people have been reminded that complacency, we sort of had complacency, okay, Feed the Future was funded, there was $1 billion a year, everything must be okay. Not. I think we have learned that focusing on addressing hunger, while as Gloria just said, remains an enormous challenge for the world. But just focusing on hunger, as is the sort of key phrase of Sustainable Development Goal number 2, is not enough. Even if we achieve zero hunger, we are not going to achieve excellent nutrition. We are not going to achieve really true food security. So the simplification that is sort of embedded in SDG 2, I think is a too narrow a simplification for thinking. And I think that since about 2015, with some experience for Feed the Future under its belt, USAID was part of this, the Global Panel on Agriculture and Food Systems that I've been engaged with since about 2012, I've watched the thinking, the global thinking, evolve in the direction of considering all causes of malnutrition, not just hunger. Poverty and constrained access to food result in a lack of calories, hunger, and that is truly something that's out there. But increasingly, there's a greater realization that the malnutrition has a much broader reach. It's often called the triple burden of malnutrition, hunger being one form of malnutrition, but micronutrient malnutrition, the vitamins and minerals that are present in dairy products, in fish, in vegetables, and fruits, are actually seriously lacking in most people's diets. The numbers vary between 3 and 5 billion out of a population of 8 billion. It may include you. And yet those micronutrients are, we know from medical research, essential for good health. We're also seeing the triple part of the burden, which is that the rise of obesity and overweight is just enormous. And it is rising faster even than the recent rise in numbers in hunger. During the pandemic in the United States, obesity rose to its highest level ever, topping 40% of the adult population. That's a lot. Consumption of, you've all heard the phrase, sugar, fats, and salt, are very much identified with this trend, and much to people's surprise that the trend toward rising rates of overweight and obesity in the low and middle income countries is as strong as it is in the United States. Food has become, certain kinds of food have become available, affordable, and very desirable to folks in developing countries. So the rates of diabetes, the rates of cardiac diseases, the rates of cancer, all non-communicable diseases associated with a lack of micronutrients and obesity and overweight are very prevalent. We have also learned, and this is part of our global panel work, that the rates of malnutrition, the triple burden of malnutrition, are not necessarily associated with poverty. Actually, rising incomes in my days in USAID were thought to be sort of the key solution to malnutrition and hunger, that if people had better incomes, higher incomes, they would not be malnourished. They would be, in fact, healthy. This is not true. The triple burden of malnutrition has come back to bite us. Further, we have also realized since the 1990s, economic growth, agriculture, and trade, that markets are crucial, play a crucial role in the whole provision of diets and food, and that in fact market disruptions are an enormous risk and challenge for everybody all around the world, from low-income countries to our own country here in the US. And basically we have learned, with data to prove it, that most people buy most of their diets in markets. They do not produce it in their backyards. They do not produce it on their farms. They purchase it somewhere. So studies even from very rural Tanzania show that people are spending an increasing proportion of their income on food. So markets are now, and the private sector control of markets are really very top of mind. So with this sort of background of learning that we've begun to see, that we've seen over the last 20 years, we're also now seeing a real stronger recognition of climate change and its impact on agriculture production. The 2008-2009 food price crisis was partly the result of a simultaneous occurrence of drought in countries that were exporting major staple crops, wheat, rice, and maize. But we have discovered that climate change is not only, agriculture is not only affected by climate change, but agriculture actually generates climate change. As much as a third of greenhouse gas emissions today are now estimated to come from agriculture and the food systems that actually take the products from the markets to the consumers. So we are looking now at an agricultural sector that needs to both adapt to climate change as well as to mitigate climate change. And this is a really steep learning curve for many farmers who are still worried about increasing productivity, and now are being told not only do you have to worry about productivity, you have to worry about whether climate change is a risk for you or whether you are contributing to greater climate change. So the SDG 2 refers to sustainable agriculture as kind of part of zero hunger. But in fact, I think the sort of primacy of sustainability in terms of ag and food systems is rising rapidly. That COP28, sorry, which is going to be held at the end of this year, is actually spending a day, we're planning to spend a day on discussions of food system change. So I think we now have a much higher profile for food beyond just food security in the sense of staple crops, rice, maize, wheat, and much more focused on the micronutrient contents, the nutritional quality, people's food choices, affordability, and food safety, as data has been shown that, in fact, some of the techniques spraying vegetables with pesticides are actually not healthy for the consumers. So the idea of food security to me is an idea which still has a lot of political power because governments feel responsible for assuring the food security of their populations. But I think we are beginning to sort of move and transfer and transform our ideas about food security into really worrying about the food systems as a whole. And food systems are clearly not working now. We have hunger, we have micronutrient malnutrition, we have obesity. The system needs to work better to result in the mantra of the UN Food System Summit that was held in 2021, sustainable, healthy diets for all. Remember that phrase.
Yeah, right.
Sustainable, healthy diets for all. It's not just food security, but it's sustainable, healthy diets for all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmy. Thank you. That transformation happened over many years, but at least we got there. I remember the days when it was all about production, and it was really quite frustrating because, for the most part, farmers are consumers. And so it isn't just about getting their production up. And when their production goes up, prices go down, which makes it difficult for them as consumers. So it's a very complex system, as I'm sure all of you know. But thank you for walking us through that. And let's continue the transformation. David, I remember my early days working on food security. It was exactly how Emmy described it. And I know that we have gone very far from that, and Emmy has raised a lot of the complexities around worrying about healthy diets for all. So, David, what does, I've heard you in conversations talk about food systems transformation. What is this? What is this about, and how does it come together? How does it build upon what Emmy just talked about? So, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me on this panel. It's hard to build on what Emmy said earlier because I think she's covered pretty much everything that we really what we need to be worried about. It is about sustainable and healthy diets. If we wanted to go back in history, we could go all the way back to PL 480 and the Eisenhower administration, where food security was defined as food staples, cereals, right? And shipping those all over the world to countries in need. But obviously, we've come a long way from that time, and our definitions have certainly changed. And they continue to change, as Emmy pointed out. And I think what's really exciting is that when we start talking about a food systems transformation, is we are really bringing a lot of new science to bear on our understanding of what sustainable, healthy diets are. So, there's a lot of work obviously on micronutrient intake and the role of food fortification and biofortification, healthier diets and dietary diversity, WASH, right? Better water sanitation and hygiene, and the critical importance of our gut biome in translating into healthy outcomes, better health services, and so much more. And of course, gender, right? For how many decades did we just address gender as sort of this add-on to projects? I mean, it was a terrible approach. Now we realize that sustainable and healthy diets has everything to do with transformative gender approaches, gender and empowerment and those issues, because those are where decisions are made in that nexus of gender. So many of you, I think, will see your own ideas, your own work, your own careers, in this conversation. So I guess, one of the questions here is, what's all this new buzz around food systems and food systems transformation? What does it really mean? So I'm a researcher. Let me be academic for just a second. Food systems, or the sort of systems thinking, comes from the literature on complex adaptive systems. And for those of you that are thinking about AI and how the singularity is going to take over the world, that's a complex adaptive system. And one of the features of a complex adaptive system is we don't really, it's so complex that we don't really know what might happen. It's very unpredictable. The outcomes are unpredictable, right? So when you think about a food system, and as Gloria was saying, it is complicated, right? We don't know what happens here, how it'll result to something over there. Those are complex systems, and a food system is simply looking at the lens of how we produce, exchange, consume, process, and dispose of food through that complexity lens. So okay, enough of the academics. It's a fun way to look at it, but I think the real question is, what does it mean for us, for those of us working on food and nutritional security? First, I think it's quite obvious that our work is no longer about increasing food staple yields. That's not the only thing we can be focusing in on. Food staple fundamentalism, I think, has to be a thing of the past in how we think about growth and development in general, and food systems more specifically. Second, I think we have to deal with these harsh realities, like Emmy said, with respect to diet quality issues and the coexistence of overweight and obesity with micronutrient malnutrition and hunger and other conditions. And we have to recognize that our food systems, our markets, and our cultures are in many cases exacerbating the problem. And that those same production systems, those same markets, and those same cultures in many cases are also threatening our food, land, and water systems, right? Without which there is no food. Third, our food system is subject to incredible numbers of shocks at increasing frequency. Mm-hmm. And whether that's from human events, such as the current conflict in Ukraine, or because of climate change and adverse weather events, the fact is that in this complex system, perturbations, shifts, changes are happening all the time with greater frequency, which means resilience becomes just so critical to understanding what might or might not happen. So rather than identifying the problems, which I think all of you know, I mean, this is what you do sort of in your careers and in your professions, let me just talk in very broad terms about, what are our recommendations, our solutions, our ways forward. Clearly, there's still a lot to be gained from science, technology, and innovation, right? There's a lot of work, and many of you are involved in it. Many of our innovation labs are involved in it. CGIAR is involved in it, in testing new solutions in the scientific and technical space to improve diets, improve nutrition, increase agricultural productivity, and improve environmental sustainability. But science and technology only get us so far. There's a lot of social innovation that comes along with that, a lot of institutional innovation that comes along with it. Hence the emphasis on gender and inclusion, right? Science doesn't work without those types of issues being taken into fundamental consideration. And I think historically we've sort of shied away from talking about social innovation. Certainly back in the 1950s we did, because, during the Cold War, that was something the other side was doing. But social innovation really is what many of you are involved in, and it really is something I think we need to be much more attuned to. Markets and trade obviously have a really important role to play. Trade equilibrates, the absence of food in one country during an emergency, things like that, or just during the normal course of events, and allows countries to specialize according to their comparative advantage. Markets are also a space that many of you work in, and what's important to remember is that what we're looking for in food systems are competitive markets. Mm-hmm. Markets that are non-competitive can be as damaging to producers or consumers, depending on the structure, the market power, the industry concentration, and things like that. We should all be working towards not just market solutions, but competitive market solutions. Otherwise, the efficiency gains of markets are lost. And of course, public policy has a role to play. I'm a policy researcher at the end of the day. I was going to say this anyway. Whether it's a policy nudge towards healthier choices, like more nutrient-dense foods, lower taxes or no taxes on nutrient-dense healthy foods, or in school lunches, or maybe procurement of school lunches from farmers within a given district or something like that. These are all really interesting ideas that can be done with pretty large policy interventions that don't take too much in terms of resources, but just some planning and some evaluation to really make them happen. So let me stop there.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, David. I think that's a good segue to Emmy's talking about the various complex component parts of assuring healthy and sustainable healthy lives for all, and taking a look at the innovations, the institutions, the policies, etc. So what you're telling us is take a look at the whole system, not just one part of it. Let me Let me now move to Dina. Dina, when you were the head of Food for Peace, you presided over the world's biggest emergency food response operation. The U.S. government continues to be the biggest responder to emergency situations. And that's really important. For those of us, for those of you who work in humanitarian crisis situations, you know how important that is. It is an important life-saving response. But we also know that that's not going to take us where Emmy was. It's not going to take the world where Emmy was suggesting we should be. And so, Dina, now as the head of the bigger organization, the organization within USAID that actually looks at the development and humanitarian nexus, tell us what development solutions that you're thinking about that would respond and be able to actually take advantage of that nexus. So over to you, Dina.
Well, thank you very much. I'm just delighted to be part of this panel, to be with so many of you who are partners, important partners in this business of development, and also just want to acknowledge these two extraordinary women leaders, Gloria and Emmy, who I started my career as a young officer at USAID, and they have been just giants in the field of development and extraordinary leaders that I've learned so much from, and I'm just honored to be on the panel with you, and IFPRI being such an important current partner to our thinking and understanding of the nature of the global food crisis. So thank you for that. Feed the Future, the Global Hunger Initiative, I think you heard an extraordinary expose by Emmy on its evolution, and she's spot on. The new and updated Global Food Security Strategy does talk about how our thinking in nutrition needs to evolve, how our thinking on food systems needs to evolve, how climate change needs to be front and center in all that we do. When the Feed the Future was launched, people were not talking about soil health per se, or emissions, or this sort of thing. And this is very much the topic of the day, brought on by the global food crisis, which has made fertilizer in short supply and so many inputs more expensive. And I'd like to talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the Feed the Future platform and how development can actually respond to a global food crisis. We did have an extraordinary response by the United States, extraordinary leadership, $13 billion in humanitarian aid in response to the global food crisis last year. But it may be less well known that Congress also appropriated $1 billion for Feed the Future to respond to the global hunger crisis through a development platform. And I think this is just a really long overdue acknowledgement that year-on-year relief is not going to get the job done, and that we do need to invest more in these underlying food systems. Emmy said, $1 billion, job done, but it's been $1 billion since 2009, and that money is going a lot less far than it used to do. And we do have some quite extraordinary results when you unpack Feed the Future, and I've been looking at it, making a study of it in my first 6 months, and you do see poverty and stunting, a form of malnutrition, declining by 20 to 25% in areas that Feed the Future works. But that money is going to very small areas in a global context that requires much, much greater investments. And so I do want to acknowledge that we do know an awful lot about how to solve global hunger, and the technologies are evolving, but that we shouldn't be dismissive of the investments that are being made and the ability that we have to scale what works, because I think we do know a lot about that. But with the $1 billion that we received, essentially doubling Feed the Future for the first time since it began in a 12-month period, we asked our missions to look at a couple things. First was to mitigate the impact of the global fertilizer shortfalls, not just by improving access to fertilizer through market systems, which was important, but also focusing on fertilizer use efficiency. Farmers very much often using 2 to 4 times more fertilizer than they need. It's very expensive. They get no result from it, and it's terrible for the environment. So these were really critical interventions which the crisis shone a spotlight on, and which the development partners were able to respond to in a way that humanitarians wouldn't necessarily have that optic. We also asked them, you need to think about sustaining local and regional food production today while making those systems more resilient? How can we accelerate a lot of these innovations that are already there? And we've been able to accelerate through market systems, seed systems, drought-tolerant seed uptake. We've been able to expand access to information to help farmers improve crop, soil, and water management practices. Reducing post-harvest loss has really come on in a big way because the food is expensive and they want to capitalize on every drop of it, and it has a nutrition component. A lot of these fruit and vegetables, 40% are lost. They go to waste, and they also are a terrible emitter of methane. And so the initiative you see moving, I think, more expansively into food loss and waste, including with the supplemental funds. This was one of the things that the missions and the countries really wanted to focus on. And then finally, access to finance for smallholders and small and medium enterprises. And we know, as Emmy said, that people rely on markets and on family to cope more than they do humanitarian assistance or governments when there's a crisis. And keeping those input suppliers in business, the traders in business, and we did an awful lot of help refinancing loans, providing small grants, credit guarantees, all of these things to keep systems running, just as we did in the United States in response to COVID. Again, not necessarily something that humanitarians will prioritize, but are absolutely vital, and development actors know how to do that. When I was visiting Malawi, I did have a chance to see how farmers are actually, and communities are not only in crisis, but are getting, necessity is the mother of invention. Getting really smart about how to cope and adapt. And we were able to provide communities that normally monocrop in maize with access to improved varieties of soybean and peanuts, which they're very interested in planting because it doesn't require fertilizer, which maize does. It improves soil health by putting nutrition back into the soil, nitrogen back into the soil. It brings a high income, and it happens to be really nutritious. So taking an advantage of a moment of crisis, we reached 100,000 farmers, and some of the implementers in here who helped us do that. It really was an extraordinary thing for me to see coming from a humanitarian background. That we were able to do that sort of thing. We have bundled all of those approaches into a accelerated innovation delivery initiative to reach 6 million farmers in Southern and Eastern Africa in concert with the CG, bringing innovators and seed suppliers and others who have access to important information and innovations together with last mile delivery partners in response to the global crisis. So that's just a little bit about what we're doing. I will say that I think that we have an opportunity to think more about shock response windows in development, that shocks are the new normal. We should just simply build those in and not wait for humanitarians to show up. I think there's more we can do on strategic partnerships, particularly crowding in the private sector, because we're never going to get it done alone with ODA.
Thank you so much, Dina, for a long time person working on and thinking about food and nutrition security. And as a taxpayer, I am very proud to hear about what the U.S. government is doing, looking at these things. And you should all be, working with the rest of the world in trying to address the issue that is facing us today. And so, Emmy, building upon what we heard Dina talk about, I was wondering if you have additional recommendations on what we should and can do in the development sphere in order to achieve sustainable, healthy diets for all. Over here, Emmy.
Yes, I'll try to be very brief since I used too much of my time on the first go. And I do really appreciate, Dina, your vision and your commitment and the breadth of the undertaking that you're launching right now. I think your phrase, necessity is the mother of invention, may apply to USAID as well as to farmers in Malawi.
Yeah.
But let me just kind of briefly say, in order to get sustainable, healthy diets for all, remember that phrase, I think in addition to farmers and markets, which we've already talked about, there are sort of three things that I think are important. One is that nutrition and health actually need to be related much more closely. USAID spends a great deal of money on health, child survival, healthcare systems, AIDS, HIV/AIDS, whatever. But it's very rarely really integrated with work on nutrition. As David was talking about biogenomes, right? But people are also need to think about, you know, if healthcare services recommend treatment for something like overweight and obesity, right? They are doing so at a cost because it's been food and the way that diets are constructed that have led to those costs. So even in the United States, a call for greater relationships and greater integration of nutrition and health efforts, I think, has to be top of mind. A second area, I think, is recognizing diversity within food systems, and then figuring out which policies and which programs actually are going to address that diversity and mobilize that diversity the best. I'm going to defer to David's comments about complex adaptive systems and not exactly being clear if you push something here, add fertilizer here, that it also challenges the sort of cost effectiveness of the system, or you push ground nuts here and then aflatoxin, a issue in food safety emerges there. So in fact, we have to be very cognizant of this diversity and this complexity as we go forward and think about policies and programs to sort of that match that. The last thing that I would kind of recommend is something to be thought about. I actually haven't seen this movie, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, that one, the one that won the Oscar. Anyway, but food systems require everyone, everywhere, all at once to actually think about how they contribute to and how they benefit from the intentional transformation of food systems. And this means you who live here in the US. But it's farmers, families, communities, investors, market players, healthcare systems, taxpayers, leaders in all sectors, and politicians. I don't know if we have any congressional representatives here, but everyone, everywhere, all at once has a distinct interest in food. I mean, you all are going to eat lunch today, right? Anyhow, we have a distinct interest in food. We play a role in articulating our demands. We play a role in sort of meeting other people's demands. And so I think that this is something that we absolutely need to sort of define as a vital North Star for development action going forward. We have to have sustainable, healthy diets for all if, as a globe, we are going to actually make it to the next generation. Gloria mentioned that the SDGs are somewhat off track right now. 2030 is going to come up much sooner than we expect. Yeah. And we're going to say, wow, did we really do everything that we could to make the situation better, to reduce the triple burden of malnutrition, to reduce the impact of non-communicable diseases, to increase healthiness? Thank you.
Thank you, Emmy. David, I'll give you an opportunity to be a little bit geeky. We're going back to research. A lot of the discussion has revolved around program solutions, but tell us about the role of research in this food systems transformation that you were talking about, and particularly at this time when changes are happening in the CGIAR system. So, the floor is yours.
Sure, thank you. First, a quick poll. How many people, show of hands, are familiar with CGIAR? Oh, that's a pretty good number.
Yeah.
So CGIAR, for those of you that don't know, is a global research partnership for a food secure future dedicated to transforming food, land, and water systems in a climate crisis. That is our new mandate.
Mantra.
Yeah, it's our new mantra, our new mission statement or vision, if you will. It began life in 1971 as a consultative group for international agricultural research, and USAID was a primary supporter of it from the very beginning, and still is. The CGIAR system has been reviewed, evaluated, assessed, and reformed more than most global programs could probably withstand. The latest reform, which is outlined in our research and innovation strategy for the period 2022 to 2030, is our most significant reform yet. And I think it is a bold new strategy for this new world we're talking about. And mind you, I'm an incredible skeptic. I mean, I worked on the World Bank's meta-analysis, meta-evaluation of CGIR in 2004 with Omalele, who many of you may know.
She was the one I was trying to remember.
Yes, she's an incredible force of nature in our field. And I've always been a skeptic about, how do these global sort of governance initiatives work, and how don't they work? But let me say that, apart from the integration of the governance of our research centers, all 13 or 14 of them, integration of key management positions and lots of back office integration, there's a lot more that's going on. And one of the interesting aspects of it, when you break it down, is that, we've aligned our work towards 5 impact areas. And I'll read them very briefly. It's nutrition, health and food security, poverty reduction, livelihoods and jobs, gender equality, youth and social inclusion, climate adaptation and mitigation, and environmental health and biodiversity. What you don't see in any of those 5 impact areas is maize, rice, cassava, beans. And that's the essence of systems thinking. We are thinking more and more as an international research enterprise, where we're saying, look, we're not going to get there with more maize. We're not going to get there with more beans or groundnuts or whatever it may be. And that means a lot. That means that we have to work a lot more closely together on the science side of things. And that's what we're doing. We are now aligned across 3 action areas and about 30 initiatives that involve all of our centers and integrate them really tightly in how we operate. But one of the most important aspects of this is also a very fundamental recognition that we have to scale. There's only so much that science and technology can do if no one figures out how to bring it to scale, right? And that's where many of you come in. That's why many of you know the CGIR system, because you've been scaling partners. And while the innovation labs are our innovation partners, right? We do research with them, we do lab work with them, we do field work with them. It's USAID's implementing partners that play such a key role in taking things to farmers, to consumers, to the market, to millers, to processors, to all sorts of different areas. And that's where I think we have a new lease on life. We have to figure out how to partner for impact, right? It's not easy. Our technologies are, in general, what we put out there are provided on a non-exclusive basis, right? Whether it's a new cultivar or a new processing technique, we make them available to all comers. And not every private company, for instance, wants to have to compete with the next person who comes along and gets our technology for free as well. So, there are issues like that. But having said that, the space, I think, is incredibly open for competition, for innovation, and for lots of entrants, lots of partners to come in. And while many of the organizations that you represent, I think have interacted as scaling partners with CGIR, I think there's just a lot more scope for growth, to tell you the truth. So fundamentally, this isn't your grandmother's or your grandfather's CGIR anymore. Cultivar improvement and agronomy, I think, are still core to a lot of the mission. Those are our base comparative advantages. But now it's a question of refocusing, that kind of work that we do and augmenting it, or even concentrating it on other things that are important to this food systems transformation we're talking about. So personally and professionally, I'm quite excited by this. I co-lead one of the initiatives, the SID-Equal initiative to deliver genetic gain to farmers' fields. Many of my colleagues are co-leading and leading initiatives as well. We're doing a lot. There are new resources on the table, not just from USAID, but from other funders and partners. There are new colleagues and new collaborations, and not just with other CG centers, but with people working in the market, people working on the farm, people working in health and nutrition. There's really, I think, a stronger mandate to work on nutrition and diets, to work on gender and inclusion, and to work on climate change issues, adaptation and mitigation, and much more aggressively than in the past.
Thank you so much, David. I think that's a good segue
Yep.
to my last question to Dina. As I raised earlier, the concern about the widening gender gap in the food system. And Dina, I just wanted to ask you, what is USAID doing to address and to introduce equality, gender equality, in your Feed the Future programs?
Thanks. For those of you who don't live and breathe Feed the Future, there are three main objectives. The first is around inclusive, sustainable ag-led growth. And when we talk about inclusion, we're really talking very intentionally around women, youth, and other marginalized groups. We need to think about not only what we grow, with more diversification, how we grow it, more climate smart, and who benefits. And that who benefits is really central to the evolution of Feed the Future, and trying to address this gender gap as part of that. The second objective is around building more resilient communities and systems, which absolutely, those of you in the resilience world know, means harnessing the capacities of everyone to reach the full potential in a community. And the third objective of Feed the Future is improving nutrition, especially for women and girls. And women so are not only a central focus of the program and have been since its inception, but also central to what we measure. On average, in the areas where we've focused our efforts, the proportion of women who are empowered has doubled, as measured by the Women's Agricultural Empowerment Index, which in itself was an innovation developed in concert with the CG system and others, to actually define and measure what does empowerment look like in agriculture for women, measuring things like changes in women's participation in on-farm decision-making and access to finance. And over the past 5 years, with the help of many of you here in this room, we've been able to help over 250,000 women document their land rights, work to address regulatory and legislative constraints hindering women's ability to own and expand their businesses, supported women entrepreneurs with financing and business incubation services, and women farmers with improved inputs, gender-sensitive extension services, and access to markets. But the FAO report tells us that once again, as in the global food security debate, we're winning a lot of battles, but still losing the war. Women, on average, their farms are 24% less productive than men's, and that hasn't changed in a decade. And then we know that because of the compounding shocks of recent year, women are growing food insecure at a faster rate than men today. 126 million more women than men are food insecure. And that is why when the FAO launched their report here in North America last month, the USAID Administrator, Samantha Power, announced our commitment to doubling our investments in gender equity and women's empowerment to $335 million a year across our food and water security portfolios, subject, of course, to congressional approval. This commitment, which we call Generating Resilience and Opportunities for Women, or GROW, will double the number of women who apply improved agricultural technologies and management practices by 24, help an additional 150,000 more women in the coming year benefit from formalized and documented land rights, and reduce the gender gap in access to finance by 20%. Now, we've long had these kinds of indicators at the project activity level and at the mission level, but we have set global targets for the first time. And I think, it's for these indicators, we tend to do what we measure. So I think actually it's a really important step. The report makes really clear that there are some thorny issues around women's time constraints in particular that we have to address. This time poverty keeps them in lower paid jobs, and many of the opportunities we want to give them and you all are providing them, they simply can't take advantage of because of time poverty. And we need to be more intentional about addressing systemic issues like discriminatory policies and social norms. It would be great if this were just a technical fix, but it's much more profound than that. And I don't think we really know, as much as we invest in focus, getting the pathways right and what is the biggest return on investment is very much, I think, an open question. And we need to let women and girls take the lead and tell us what change they need to see. We need to engage men and entire communities and government leaders to advance together, and we need to identify change agents so that our work to address social norms is done without causing harm. All of these priorities are very much in line with USAID's new localization agenda, which I commend to you. It calls on us to center the voices of the most marginalized and promote broadly inclusive local leadership in this work. And finally, I just wanted to make a point about data and our commitment through this to doing more and doing better when it comes to our dive for data and evidence on pathways and improving our sex and age disaggregated data. I think we've all come a long way in this regard, but it's very much a partial victory, and the FAO report makes really clear that women are still invisible in a lot of our work, and if we don't see them, including in our data, we're not going to be able to serve them or empower them or learn from them. So we're recommitting to this again and putting more resources towards it, and we hope that by doing that, other people will also respond to the FAO report in the same way with increasing commitments. We will be hosting a partners meeting, a gender learning event towards the end of the year to really explore these pathways and what we can do together, so that we hope that 10 years from now, we're not reflecting again on slow progress, but rather celebrating some success. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dia. I think we talk about systems, we talk about nutrition, we talk about needing to look comprehensively, but you've brought in two other topics that, especially the localization, which is near and dear to my heart. Nothing is going to be sustained if the work is being done by us rather than those for whom the development work is being implemented. So thank you for bringing that into the picture, and of course, the importance of centering women if we're going to achieve the sustainable, healthy diets for all. So thank you for that, Emmy. And although the UN is not very optimistic that we will reach the Sustainable Development Goal number 2, I think we've heard a lot of very good ideas that you have put on the table for us to think about and consider as we continue to design and implement programs that will create opportunities for sustainable, healthy diets for all. Thank you so much for being here today. I have not been a good moderator. We exceeded the time. But I do want to thank SID for giving us the opportunity to have this event. And I see that our SID chair is here, Wade Warren. Thank you so much, Wade, for the opportunity to get people together to discuss a very important topic. And thank you all for being here with us today. Thank you.
We managed to all cover different areas. Good luck on that gender thing. Have you read?
Such a dog. It's such a bear, right?
I know. Have you read that book on measuring seeing women or something? It's a new book, and it has all kinds of data on how we're not seeing 50% of the population.
Yeah, still a lot of work to do. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Yeah, let me come down.
How are you, Alina?
Good to see you. How's it going?
You're so flattering. Thank you. Yeah. Good. Everything, everywhere, all at once. We got to do it. Yeah. 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 Where are you these days? How are you? Touch. Get in touch. Because I see you coming. Yeah, I'd love to have a coffee. I want to have a coffee with this lady too. Do you know? And she's out there leading. She's out there leading women. Hi. How are you?
Oh my God, I am so excited to see you. Like, I feel like I need to talk to you, like, about my life.
Okay, you're in Arlington
Like,
still?
not,
Yeah,
are you still in
I
Arlington?
am, yeah. I am in McLean, and I am retired, and as of tonight, I'm going to be done directing this damn play.
Oh my God.
And so,
Fantastic.
but
I
I'm
mean,
having
I
my
need,
knee
like, a
replaced on
coffee.
June 19th, so it's before June 19th.
I love it. And by the way, Demetria, Matt, Fred is here.
I know, the old Moscow crowd.
I love it.
Yeah. Do you know, I was thinking about you. I thought about you watching the Olympics.
Oh, really?
And watching the people doing whatever the thing with the Canadian thing. You did it in Moscow.
Yes.
And I kept thinking,
Yes.
oh my God, I really, I should have gone in Moscow. Because
It was
you
so
guys were doing
Oh my God.
curling.
Yeah.
The Moscow curling team.
Well, no, actually, it was broomball,
A broomball.
which
Okay.
was much more violent than curling.
Oh,
But I think this. I don't know
Anyhow.
how to get off of here.
it's okay. I have fun now.
Sure, absolutely. Hi.
Very nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
You sing my song. I am so I worked in international development for 15 years and with Demetria, with Fred, with so many of us. Then I left and I worked nationally for not quite 10 years now. I'm back and working in international development again.
Okay.
I am also, so I work in ag. Ag is my field, but it's regenerative agriculture. It's the eco-based agriculture. That's my passion. I am also a holistic nutrition coach because that connection is impossible to disconnect. And so many people don't see it. And you've given me such hope by your talk because the fact of the soil health relating to our human health is so critical. And that was actually pretty well known when I worked nationally. I was directing a small nonprofit called, they ran ACHA, the ACHA program. These two worlds don't often meet, national and international. But
I was on Agree. I was a co-chair for Agree.
that's how I know you.
Yes.
I was going to Agree when it started.
Right,
Decades ago.
and that's what we were trying to, that was my role, kind of trying to make that thing about that, the U.S. often thinks of itself as like unique. And yet, we're highly dependent upon, exports for generating incomes, and we're unilaterally diverting a third to 40% of the maize crop into biofuels, and then saying to people, well, you guys shouldn't be hungry, you should produce more maize, right? So we're like totally inconsistent because people don't, like you were just saying, people aren't bringing what to me are obvious threads, they're not bringing those threads together. And USAID has trouble because many of the USAID people think internationally, they don't think domestically.
It's like that crossover.
So that conversation is not happening.
Is Agree still active?
No.
Because I love Agree.
I know.
I love it.
We
It's
kind of,
such a great platform.
it kind of evolved. We kind of ran out of money for sort of the health nutrition side, actually. The part that got traction and funding from the Walmart Foundation, Walton Family Foundation, was the work on soil quality and water quality. And a lot of the sort of farmer associated people from the Agree family really wanted to go into that. And it's now really providing the underpinnings for climate-related funding now, because people are realizing that you need to have cover crops, you need to have more organic material. The thing that's emerging, of course, is PFAs. You know that, right?
Yes.
I know.
Yes.
And
yes, and they're huge.
and that was a solution from what to do with, the